The vibration of my cell phone against the glass surface of my home office desk cut through the absolute silence of my Tuesday morning. The digital clock on my monitor read exactly 9:15 when the caller ID displays the direct commercial routing number for Vanguard National Bank, the primary financial institution where I maintain my corporate logistics firm's liquidity. It is never a courtesy call. I slid my thumb across the screen. This is Nora. Nora, it is Julian Cross, Senior Branch Director at the downtown office. His voice entirely lacked the polished, deferential tone that bank executives typically use when speaking to premium account holders. It sounded thin, forced, and rigid with institutional panic. I apologize for calling before my first meeting, but I need to speak with you immediately regarding the $400,000 unsecured commercial liquidity loan originated under your Social Security number. I did not stand up. I did not drop my pen or gasp in horror. I reached over, closed my laptop screen with a soft click, and gave the phone my absolute, terrifyingly cold attention. "Julian," I said, my voice perfectly level, "I have not submitted a commercial lending application in 8 years. My business is entirely self-funded, and my personal credit profile is hard-locked at all 3 major bureaus." I heard a sharp, sudden intake of breath over the receiver. Nora? The $400,000 principal was fully approved by our underwriting department and completely disbursed 48 hours ago. The application bypassed the hard inquiry suppression because the applicant submitted a verified internal override code. The loan is registered entirely under your name and Social Security number. Before I could ask him exactly how a near $500,000 loan bypassed my biometric security protocols, the heavy metallic clatter of the brass mail slot echoed from my front hallway. A stack of morning mail hit the hardwood floor. "Do not freeze the account yet, Julian. Do not initiate any internal fraud protocols until I call you back," I said cleanly. I terminated the call. I walked out of my home office and stepped into the foyer. Sitting at the very top of the mail pile was a thick, certified envelope printed on heavy stock. It bore the unmistakable, aggressive black typography and official seal of the United States Department of the Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service. Most people experience a massive spike of adrenaline when they receive certified mail from the IRS. I simply picked it up and tore the perforated edge with one smooth motion. It was a formal notice CP-504, an urgent alert generated directly by the Criminal Compliance Division. It stated that my Social Security number had been used to initiate a massive, unverified capital disbursement to an undeclared offshore entity. Because the capital was aggressively bypassing federal borders under the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, the IRS was officially classifying the $400,000 as a critical tax evasion event, demanding an immediate explanation under threat of instantaneous asset seizure. I did not panic. I simply looked at the secondary authorized guarantor names listed on the bank's origination file attached to the IRS notice. Arthur and Evelyn Sterling, my parents. I did not call them to scream. Hysteria is the exact currency guilty people use to muddy the waters. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to their upscale suburban home. I did not bother to knock. I unlocked the heavy wooden front door with my old spare key and walked directly into their vaulted, sunlit living room. Arthur and Evelyn were standing by the marble fireplace, casually packing 2 massive, rigid, luxury suitcases. A stack of freshly printed travel itineraries and 2 pristine passports sat on the glass coffee table. They did not flinch when I walked in. They did not look guilty. They looked profoundly, arrogantly relieved. Evelyn looked up, smoothing the fabric of her expensive cashmere sweater. Her face instantly arranged itself into a mask of weary, maternal condescension. "Nora, darling, there is absolutely no need for you to barge in here looking so dramatic. We were going to call you from the airport lounge." I stepped forward, keeping my posture entirely rigid. I did not yell. I pulled the certified federal notice from my bag and dropped it flat onto the glass coffee table next to their passports. You forged my signature to secure a $400,000 commercial loan from Vanguard National, I stated, my voice as flat and heavy as a steel vault door. And you triggered an active IRS review and a massive federal tax liability in the process. Arthur sighed heavily, crossing his arms like a CEO dealing with a deeply insubordinate employee. Now let's not turn this into a massive legal production, Nora. We hit a severe liquidity crisis with our real estate portfolio and needed the cash to secure an offshore retirement property. We used your profile because your credit score is flawless. It was a purely logical family decision. Evelyn offered a cold, indifferent shrug, zipping the final compartment of her heavy suitcase. We needed it. You will pay for it. Consider it a mandatory return on our investment for raising you. You have a highly successful career. You will figure out the monthly minimums. You always do. They actually believe that because we shared a last name, the federal penal code simply did not apply to them. They believed they could steal my identity, drain my credit, and leave me holding a radioactive federal debt while they drank champagne on a tax haven beach. I have a safe flight, I said cleanly. I turned around and walked out the front door. 2 days later, their domestic cell phones were permanently disconnected. They had vanished. I checked a shared family frequent flyer account they had arrogantly forgotten to unlink from my email. They had utilized one-way first-class tickets to Georgetown, Grand Cayman. They thought distance equaled absolute immunity. I did not panic. I calmly gathered my physical passport, my original Social Security card, and a rigid plastic folder containing my authentic certified tax transcripts and the IRS notice. I drove directly to the Vanguard National downtown branch and walked straight into Julian Cross's frosted glass office. Julian looked exhausted. His tie was slightly loosened, and he was staring with intense focus at a dense, red digital ledger on his dual monitors. He closed the heavy oak door behind me, sealing us in a soundproof environment. I sat in the heavy leather chair opposite his mahogany desk, unzipped my folder, and placed my physical passport flat on the polished wood. I want to see the complete unredacted application file, Julian, I said, my voice entirely devoid of any emotional distress, and I want you to show me exactly where those funds landed. Julian swallowed hard. He did not offer any accommodating banking platitudes. He tapped his spacebar, waking up his secondary monitor, and turned the heavy screen slightly toward me. The application was digitally routed through a verified external accounting portal to bypass our internal risk algorithms, Julian murmured, his voice tight with institutional anxiety. But the funds did not land in a domestic commercial account, Nora. He clicked a tab labeled International Routing Telemetry. A new panel opened, displaying the beneficiary institution, the SWIFT code, and the receiving account status in a dense, bureaucratic grid. I leaned forward. The screen displayed a massive alphanumeric block. It was a commercial holding account at a private offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. But the status bar next to the account number was not glowing with a standard green confirmation. It was locked in a harsh, flashing yellow text. Status: Overseas account. Restricted hold. Federal injunction. Julian froze, his hand hovering completely still over the computer mouse. He stared at the flashing yellow text, realizing exactly what he was looking at in real time. The color drained completely from his face as the sheer, devastating magnitude of the federal intervention registered in his mind. He slowly turned the monitor another inch toward me, his eyes wide with absolute institutional terror. "Nora," Julian whispered, the silence in the office becoming suddenly suffocating. The IRS didn't just flag the wire transfer for a tax review, they just executed a hard asset freeze on the receiving account. under the criminal enforcement provisions of the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, Julian finished, his voice catching in his throat, completely stripped of its usual polished banking cadence. Nora, the $400,000 never officially cleared into their private Cayman liquidity pool. It is suspended in a restricted international holding state, or your parents cannot access a single cent of that principal. The silence in the frosted glass office was dense, heavy, and absolute. Julian was a senior branch director, accustomed to managing multi-million-dollar domestic portfolios and polite corporate overdrafts. He was not accustomed to staring at a live federal seizure of a $500,000 offshore wire transfer. I did not blink. I did not gasp or ask him how the universe could allow my parents to betray me so profoundly. Panic is a luxury for people who need someone else to clean up their messes. I only had a paper trail. "Show me the exact timestamps of the routing process, Julian," I instructed, my voice entirely devoid of emotional distress, carrying the exact measured tone of a forensic auditor. "I want to see the microscopic timeline of when the funds left Vanguard National and when they hit the Cayman holding account." Julian swallowed hard, his professional composure replaced by a profound, institutional anxiety. He tapped his spacebar, pulling up the deep back-end telemetry logs that retail clients are never permitted to see. A cascading list of encrypted digital movements populated his second monitor in a brutal, unapologetic red font. The $400,000 principal was fully disbursed into a temporary domestic checking account opened under your Social Security number precisely 48 hours ago, Julian explained rapidly, tracing the lines of code with his silver pen. 10 minutes later, the authorized users initiated an expedited international wire transfer using a verified external accounting portal to bypass our internal domestic fraud algorithms. I leaned slightly forward, resting my hands completely flat on his heavy mahogany desk. "And the IRS intervention?" Julian clicked a secondary tab labeled Compliance and Regulatory Holds. A new panel opened, displaying the SWIFT code and the receiving account status in a dense bureaucratic grid. Because the wire amount was massive and aggressively bypassing federal borders, Julian murmured, the color draining further from his face, it automatically triggered an immediate FinCEN alert. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network flagged the movement as high-risk capital flight. That automated alert directly notified the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, which triggered the CP-504 tax evasion notice sent to my home, I concluded cleanly, connecting the exact mechanical dots of their arrogant, catastrophic failure. "Yes," Julian agreed, his voice a low, terrified murmur. Arthur and Evelyn assumed that because the Cayman Islands operate as a notorious tax haven, the liquidity would vanish from federal jurisdiction the second it left Vanguard National. But since 2014, Cayman institutions are legally bound by international treaties to report all incoming U.S. citizen assets directly to the Department of the Treasury. The federal government instantly locked the receiving institution. The money is sitting in their account, but it is highly radioactive. They cannot withdraw it, transfer it, or utilize it to purchase their overseas real estate. My parents had successfully forged my identity, secured a massive commercial loan, and vanished on a first-class flight to a tax haven, entirely convinced that they had successfully outrun the American legal system. They had not outrun it. They had simply delivered $500,000 directly into a federal trap they built themselves. "Julian," I said calmly, pointing to his keyboard, "I want you to pull up the original commercial lending application file. I want to see exactly how they bypassed the biometric two-factor authentication to secure a massive loan under my profile without my phone ever ringing." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Nora, providing the complete internal underwriting audit file directly to a client formalizes the identity theft claim. Vanguard National will be legally obligated to initiate a formal, multi-agency investigation, and we must report the fabricated application directly to federal authorities. There is absolutely no unwinding this once I access the core file. I am not asking to unwind it, I stated, looking him dead in the eye, my posture completely rigid. I am the victim of severe financial fraud and identity theft. Open the file. Julian nodded once. He did not argue with a federal liability. He clicked a secure red-bordered icon on his desktop and entered his master administrative credentials. The screen buffered for 2 seconds before a stark, dense application grid filled the monitor. I read the lines with cold precision. The name at the very top of the application was mine. The Social Security number was mine. The date of birth was mine. The gross annual revenue listed perfectly matched my corporate logistics firm. But the primary contact section was not mine. Julian turned the screen toward me and pointed to a 10-digit number glowing on the monitor. It was not a typo. It was the architecture of a trap. They had not just borrowed my financial history, they had deliberately routed all the bank's security codes and underwriting verification calls directly to my mother's cell phone. Evelyn intercepted the approval calls, I noted smoothly, my voice carrying the chill of a winter morning. Julian's jaw tightened. He clicked a secondary tab labeled Identity Verification Uploads. If she changed the contact number during the high-tier application process to bypass the hard inquiry block, Julian murmured, typing rapidly to access the encrypted server, the underwriting algorithm would have mandated a secondary visual verification, a piece of government-issued photo identification, and a verified signature to prove you legally authorized the data change and accepted the lending terms. He hit enter. A high-resolution scanned image loaded onto the exact center of his screen. Julian stared at the image for 3 full seconds. The accommodating demeanor of a branch director evaporated entirely. He was now looking at a massive, catastrophic compliance breach executed flawlessly within his own institution. He looked at the uploaded image, then looked down at the physical, legitimate United States passport I had just placed on his desk. He turned the monitor another inch toward me, exposing the scanned document to the harsh fluorescent light. "Nora," Julian whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Look at the address and the signature on this uploaded state identification card." I leaned forward. The document on the screen was a fabricated driver's license. The face on the ID was mine, pulled directly from an old photograph. But the primary residential address listed was not my home or my corporate headquarters. It was the exact street address of my father's commercial real estate firm. And the signature at the very bottom was not a careful forgery of my handwriting. "That is my mother's signature," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of surprise. She had not even attempted to practice forging my name. Evelyn was so entirely insulated by her own arrogance, so utterly convinced that the digital systems of the world existed merely to facilitate her convenience and her greed, that she had simply signed her own name on a fabricated federal document bearing my face. Julian leaned back heavily in his oak chair. "This elevates the situation from unauthorized family use to synthetic identity theft and federal wire fraud," Julian murmured, his eyes staying locked on the high-resolution scan. "Julian," I said smoothly, unzipping my rigid plastic folder and clicking my silver pen. "Print the application metadata. Print the high-resolution scan of the fabricated ID. Print the international routing telemetry showing the Cayman holding account and the active IRS federal injunction." He paused, then nodded once. The heavy, industrial laser printer in the corner of his office hummed to life. The sound of crisp paper sliding into the output tray was the sound of an international trap snapping entirely shut. I took the thick manila envelope, placed it into my bag, and walked out of the bank. As I stepped out of the heavy glass doors and into the bright late-morning sunlight, my cell phone vibrated violently in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The caller ID displayed a restricted international number. The country code was +1345, Grand Cayman. They had just hit the bottom of the empty offshore vault. The restricted international caller ID glowed stark white against the dark screen of my smartphone. The country code was unmistakable, +1345. It was a direct line from a private financial institution operating in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. My parents had not merely arrived at their luxury destination. They had marched directly into their offshore banking branch, brimming with arrogant entitlement, or expecting to withdraw massive stacks of untraceable liquidity to close on their beachfront retirement estate. They had just hit the locked, impenetrable wall of a federal holding state. I did not let it go to voicemail. I did not ignore the call out of anxiety or anger. I slid my thumb across the glass screen and brought the phone to my ear, my posture perfectly straight in the bright, late-morning sunlight outside Vanguard National. "This is Nora," I stated, my voice as flat, cold, and heavy as a sheet of ice. "Nora!" Evelyn shrieked instantly, the polished, condescending maternal mask completely gone. Her voice was thin, reedy, and vibrating with an unfiltered, desperate panic that echoed sharply over the long-distance connection. "Nora, you need to call your bank immediately, right this second. You need to call Julian Cross and authorize the final international clearance code." I heard the frantic pacing of Arthur's heavy leather shoes in the background. The ambient, hushed hum of the Cayman banking lobby was cut by his angry, whispered demands to the offshore tellers. Why would I authorize an international clearance code for a $400,000 commercial liquidity loan I explicitly did not apply for, Evelyn? I asked, my enunciation flawless and unhurried. Arthur snatched the phone from my mother, unable to manage his spiraling panic. "Listen to me very carefully, Nora," he hissed, his voice dropping into a dark, threatening rumble that was entirely useless from 2,000 miles away. "We are standing in the middle of our offshore branch right now, where the commercial real estate broker is waiting for the deposit on our property. But the receiving manager is telling us the incoming wire from Vanguard National is locked. The principal is sitting in the account ledger, but they are refusing to grant us withdrawal access." "They are refusing withdrawal access," I noted smoothly, walking toward my parked car, "because the $400,000 you routed through an external accounting portal bypassed domestic security, but it triggered an immediate alert with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." The long-distance connection fell entirely silent. The sudden absence of Arthur's furious demands was profound. He was a ruthless real estate developer, accustomed to manipulating people, but he possessed exactly zero leverage over federal banking algorithms. "A FinCEN alert?" Arthur whispered, the words catching painfully in his throat. "Yes," I confirmed cleanly, unlocking my car door with a soft electronic chirp. Because the wire amount was massive and violently bypassing American borders, the automated regulatory system instantly notified the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. That generated the CP 504 tax evasion notice I showed you in your living room before you fled the country. Evelyn's voice suddenly cut back in, her tone shifting from arrogant entitlement to sheer naked terror. "The IRS. No, Nora, no. We used a private Cayman routing number. The American government does not have jurisdiction over this specific offshore branch. Our wealth manager guaranteed us absolute privacy. Your wealth manager lied to secure his commission." "Evelyn," I corrected her, sitting in the driver's seat and closing the heavy car door, sealing myself in a soundproof environment. "Since 2014, Cayman institutions are legally bound by the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. They are legally required to report incoming capital from United States citizens directly to the Department of the Treasury. When the IRS identified my Social Security number attached to a massive, unverified offshore deposit, They executed a hard asset freeze. A freeze? Arthur stammered, his booming authority dissolving into a pathetic, breathless croak. The money is in the account. I can see the ledger on the manager's monitor. It is suspended in a restricted international holding state, I stated, the chill in my voice absolute. You cannot withdraw it. You cannot transfer it. And you certainly cannot use it to purchase overseas real estate. You successfully stole my identity, secured a fraudulent $500,000 loan, and vanished on a one-way first-class flight. You entirely believed you had outrun the American legal system. You did not outrun it. You simply delivered the stolen principal directly into a radioactive federal trap. Evelyn began to sob loudly into the receiver, a sharp, hysterical sound entirely devoid of any dignity. Nora, you have to fix this. If the IRS audits this wire, they will seize everything. They will freeze your domestic corporate accounts to cover the tax liability. You have to protect your logistics firm. Call Julian and tell him you authorize the loan and you are simply establishing an offshore division. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy of sheer manipulation. Evelyn was attempting to use my own successful business as leverage to force me into participating in their massive federal felony. She assumed I would absorb a $500,000 debt just to keep the IRS from tearing apart my corporate liquidity. She assumed I would quietly surrender to save my reputation, just as she had conditioned me to do my entire life. She assumed wrong. I am not going to protect my firm by lying to the Internal Revenue Service and committing a Class II federal felony to secure your retirement, Evelyn. I replied evenly, resting my hands perfectly still on the leather steering wheel. I do not negotiate with people who attempt to destroy my financial existence. I operate entirely on paper. What are you doing, Nora? Arthur demanded, his panic instantly pivoting to a cold, creeping dread. Do not contact anyone else. We will fly back to the States. We will sell one of our domestic properties and pay the loan minimums. Just stall the bank. I am currently sitting in the parking lot of Vanguard National, I informed them cleanly. I just concluded a 30-minute meeting with Julian Cross in his primary office. I possess the complete, unredacted commercial lending underwriting file. Evelyn stopped sobbing entirely. The shock of my physical location completely paralyzed her. I possess the application metadata proving you bypassed the two-factor biometric authentication, I continued, listing the facts like I was reading a grocery list to a stranger. I possess the international routing telemetry showing the exact timestamp of your Cayman deposit and the active IRS federal injunction. Nora, please, Arthur whispered, as his voice shaking violently. You cannot hand that to the authorities. We are your parents. And I possess the high-resolution scanned image of the fabricated state identification card you uploaded to secure the loan, Evelyn, I added, ignoring his plea entirely. The ID features my face and Arthur's commercial office address. But you were so entirely insulated by your own arrogance, so utterly convinced that the digital systems of the world existed merely to facilitate your greed, that you simply signed your own name at the bottom of the card. A sharp, jagged gasp echoed over the international connection. Evelyn realized instantly that she had anchored her own signature to a massive case of synthetic identity theft. You did not just forge a loan, Evelyn, I stated smoothly. You provided a bank with physical, undeniable proof of your federal wire fraud. I am currently holding it in a thick manila envelope. Arthur's chest, he heaved audibly. He was calculating the catastrophic, irreversible damage of the digital paper trail. Nora, listen to me, he pleaded, the arrogance completely gone. If you hand that file to the federal authorities, they will not just reverse the loan. They will flag us internationally. We will not be able to clear customs. We will be arrested the moment we touch American soil. I did not blink. I did not soften my posture. I am acutely aware of the tactical disadvantage you are currently facing, Arthur, I replied cleanly. But noise is what guilty people use to breathe life into their lies. I only make surgical strikes. I did not wait for his desperate response. I terminated the international call with a soft, mechanical click of my thumb. I did not drive back to my home office. I pulled the gear shift into drive, merged smoothly into the downtown traffic, and headed straight for the glass and steel skyscraper housing the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force Regional Headquarters. They had fled the country to escape their debt. I was about to ensure they could never legally return. The drive to the regional headquarters of the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force took exactly 22 minutes. I did not take a deep breath to steady my nerves before walking inside. Panic is the luxury of people who have someone else to clean up their messes, and guilt is the currency of those who allow themselves to be manipulated. I possess neither. I only possessed a thick manila envelope containing absolute, undeniable proof of a $500,000 federal felony. The soaring glass and steel skyscraper was aggressively sterile, a fortress of bureaucratic procedure devoid of any welcoming architectural warmth. I parked my car, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and walked directly through the heavy revolving security doors. I bypassed the chaotic public intake seating and approached the elevated bulletproof glass of the priority enforcement desk. The federal intake agent on duty was a sharp, unsmiling man in his late 40s, accustomed to dealing with desperate individuals attempting to explain away massive tax liabilities. "State your business," he ordered cleanly, his voice amplified by the small metal speaker set into the thick glass partition. "My name is Nora," I replied smoothly, my enunciation flawless and unhurried. "I am here to formally surrender an unredacted commercial lending audit file directly to the Criminal Investigation Division. I am executing a sworn federal affidavit detailing severe synthetic identity theft, international wire fraud, and the unauthorized offshore routing of $400,000 in corporate liquidity to the Cayman Islands." The agent's eyes narrowed instantly. The mention of the Cayman Islands shifted his posture from bureaucratic boredom to sharp professional focus. I unzipped my rigid plastic folder and slid the heavy, certified IRS notice CP-504 beneath the narrow slot at the bottom of the bulletproof glass. The agent picked up the thick treasury paper, scanning the aggressive black typography and the critical tax evasion alert generated by my Social Security number. "This is an active, Level 4 capital flight injunction," the agent murmured. "The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network flagged this wire transfer 48 hours ago." "Yes," I agreed calmly, because the authorized users, Arthur and Evelyn Sterling, utilized a verified external accounting portal to bypass domestic banking algorithms and execute the massive international wire. They are currently standing in a private offshore branch in Georgetown, attempting to access the restricted holding account. The agent did not ask me to sit in the waiting area. He picked up his secure desk phone, dialing a 4-digit internal extension. 3 minutes later, a heavy electronic lock disengaged with a sharp click, and I was escorted into a stark, windowless interview room illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting. And a single metal table and 2 rigid chairs occupied the center of the space. A plainclothes detective wearing a dark suit and a tactical ID lanyard entered the room. He placed a digital audio recorder squarely in the center of the metal table. "I am Special Agent Russo, IRS Criminal Investigation Division," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly hum that demanded total compliance. "You are voluntarily surrendering documentation regarding an active offshore asset freeze." "I operate entirely on objective data, Agent Russo," I replied, sitting perfectly straight in the uncomfortable chair. "I am not here to make emotional statements. I am here to deliver a mathematical impossibility." I opened my thick manila envelope and placed the high-resolution scanned image of the fabricated state identification card flat onto the cold metal table, where 48 hours ago my parents submitted this digital file to Vanguard National Bank to secure a $400,000 commercial liquidity loan under my Social Security number, I stated cleanly. They intercepted the biometric two-factor authentication calls, but they were arrogant enough to upload this fabricated ID to bypass the final visual verification protocol. Agent Russo leaned forward, studying the glowing, abstract scan of the forged driver's license. He noted my face and the commercial real estate address listed beside it. "And the signature at the bottom?" Russo asked quietly. "That is my mother's signature, Evelyn Sterling," I noted smoothly. She did not attempt to mimic my handwriting, and she signed her own name on a federal document bearing my photograph to execute a synthetic identity theft. Russo's jaw tightened. He pulled the paper closer, recognizing the sheer devastating magnitude of the compliance breach. "This is irrefutable proof of federal wire fraud." "It is only the beginning," I corrected him seamlessly. I slid the dense red digital ledger of the international routing telemetry across the table. "This is the exact time-stamped metadata of the offshore wire transfer. My parents utilized this SWIFT code to park the stolen principal in a private Cayman holding account. They booked one-way first-class tickets to Georgetown to finalize a real estate transaction using these funds." Russo stared at the telemetry logs. The color drained slightly from his hardened face. He was an expert in financial crimes, and he instantly recognized the catastrophic, irreversible trap Arthur and Evelyn had built for themselves. "They assumed they could outrun the American jurisdiction," Russo murmured, connecting the exact mechanical dots of their failure. "They did not realize the receiving institution was bound by international reporting treaties." "Exactly," I said, the chill in my voice absolute. "The IRS locked the account before they even landed. The $400,000 is highly radioactive." Detective Russo did not waste a single second. He snatched the thick stack of printed metadata and the fabricated identification scan off the table. He looked at me with the intense, calculating focus of a predator recognizing a flawless kill shot. "Nora," Russo stated, his voice echoing in the small, soundproof room, "based on this unredacted banking audit file, the loan origination is legally classified as entirely fraudulent. Vanguard National will absorb the initial liquidity loss, and your personal credit profile will be immediately restored under a federal identity protection lock. You possess zero tax liability for the Cayman deposit." "And Arthur and Evelyn Sterling?" I asked smoothly, resting my hands perfectly still on the metal table. "They committed a Class II federal felony to secure the funds and a secondary federal felony by attempting to offshore the capital to evade taxation," Russo replied, pulling a secure, encrypted smartphone from his suit jacket. "The IRS is formally seizing the $500,000 Cayman holding account right now. They will attempt to board a return flight to the United States when they realize the money is permanently gone," I noted cleanly. "They will try to sell their domestic real estate to cover the massive legal fallout." Russo offered a cold, terrifying smile. "No, they will not," he corrected me sharply, "because I am uploading this fabricated identification scan and the routing telemetry directly to the federal FinCEN database." He tapped the screen of his secure phone rapidly, bypassing several layers of biometric security. "When a United States citizen is actively investigated for massive offshore tax evasion and international wire fraud," Russo explained, his thumbs flying across the digital keyboard, "the Department of Homeland Security automatically revokes their international travel privileges to prevent further capital flight." "Are you flagging their passports?" I asked quietly. "I am invalidating their passports," Russo corrected smoothly, hitting the execution button on his smartphone. As of exactly 10 seconds ago, Arthur and Evelyn Sterling do not possess legally recognized international travel documents. They cannot board a commercial flight. They cannot clear customs. I did not express a sudden, emotional rush of triumphant joy. I just felt the quiet, steady relief of a closed system functioning exactly as designed. My parents had built a trap to destroy my financial existence, and I had simply locked the door behind them. 3 hours later, Arthur and Evelyn stood furiously in the polished, pristine marble lobby of the Owen Roberts International Airport in Grand Cayman. The island sun baked the tarmac outside, but the interior of the private airline terminal was heavily air-conditioned and deeply tense. Their arrogant, wealthy masquerade had completely collapsed. The Cayman offshore branch had permanently locked their accounts, refusing to execute the massive real estate withdrawal. Without the stolen $400,000, the local broker immediately voided their retirement estate contract. Arthur had frantically booked 2 emergency, one-way first-class tickets back to Miami, desperate to reach American soil before the domestic paper trail could officially catch them. They approached the private customs desk, entirely convinced they could outrun the consequences by simply boarding the jet. Evelyn smoothed her expensive cashmere sweater, her hands trembling violently, while Arthur arrogantly slapped their 2 pristine passports onto the customs agent's counter. "We need to expedite our clearance," Arthur demanded, his voice projecting the impatient authority of a man accustomed to manipulating service workers. "We are experiencing a sudden family emergency." The Cayman customs agent did not offer a polite smile. He picked up the passports and scanned the microchips. The security terminal did not emit a standard green confirmation beep. The screen buffered for a fraction of a second before a stark, aggressive red banner flashed violently across the display. Status: Priority Interpol flag. Passports revoked. Active federal warrant. The customs agent froze, his hand hovering completely still over the passports. He stared at the flashing red text, realizing exactly what he was looking at. He did not hand the passports back to Arthur. He quietly reached beneath the counter and pressed a silent, heavy panic button. "Excuse me, sir," the agent said, his voice dropping into a tense, formal murmur. "I need you and your wife to step to the side of the line immediately. Your travel authorization has been permanently suspended by the United States Department of Homeland Security." Evelyn let out a sharp, breathless gasp, the color draining entirely from her face. "Suspended? What do you mean suspended? We are American citizens. We have a flight to catch." Arthur's chest heaved audibly. His survival instinct kicked in, and he immediately tried to physically snatch the passports back from the agent. "Hand me my documents right now. This is a massive, unprecedented clerical error." But before Arthur's hand could reach the marble counter, the heavy glass doors of the private terminal slid open sharply behind them. The ambient hum of the airport died completely. 2 armed Cayman Islands law enforcement officers, flanked closely by a plainclothes federal liaison, walked purposefully across the polished marble floor, their eyes locked directly onto Arthur and Evelyn. The arrival of international law enforcement inside a private luxury terminal does not happen with cinematic sirens or drawn weapons. It happens with the quiet, devastating efficiency of professionals executing a coordinated federal mandate. The ambient, hushed hum of the Owen Roberts International Airport dissolved into an absolute suffocating silence. Did the 2 armed Cayman Islands officers and the plainclothes United States federal liaison did not ask the customs agent who was causing a public disturbance. They walked directly up to the marble counter, entirely boxing Arthur and Evelyn Sterling in. Arthur's survival instinct kicked in immediately. He abandoned his aggressive, bulldozing posture and turned rapidly toward the plainclothes liaison, instantly adopting the smooth, persuasive tone of a wealthy domestic patriarch attempting to manage a minor administrative error. "Officer, thank goodness," Arthur stammered, his hands raised in a gesture of practiced, desperate diplomacy. "There has been a catastrophic miscommunication with our bank in the United States. We simply need to board our return flight to Miami to resolve a minor domestic liquidity issue with our daughter. Our passports are perfectly valid." The liaison did not shake Arthur's hand. He did not even look at his expensive silver watch. He looked directly at the Cayman customs agent who silently pushed the 2 invalidated passports across the marble counter. "I am Special Agent Carter, United States Homeland Security Attaché," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly hum that demanded total compliance in the high-end terminal. "And your travel documents are not valid, Arthur. The Department of Homeland Security officially revoked them 3 hours ago." "Revoked!" Evelyn shrieked, the polished, condescending maternal mask completely gone. Her voice was thin, reedy, and vibrating with an unfiltered panic that echoed sharply off the high glass ceilings. "You cannot revoke our citizenship. We are merely trying to return home." With a $400,000 wire transfer did not even clear. We didn't actually take any physical cash from the offshore branch. No one lost any actual money. "Ma'am," Agent Carter replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy, his posture entirely rigid. "You successfully defrauded a federally insured domestic institution for nearly $500,000 using a fabricated state identification card bearing your explicit signature. The fact that the Internal Revenue Service caught your secondary attempt to hide the capital in a Cayman holding account does not legally erase the first felony." Arthur's mouth opened, but the smooth diplomatic words died in his throat. A sickly pale gray washed over his face as the absolute magnitude of the trap I had built for them finally registered. When they were not simply facing a domestic civil lawsuit, they were facing federal extradition. "Sir," Carter continued, his voice echoing cleanly across the quiet terminal, "a family financial dispute is an argument over a holiday dinner. A notarized biometric forgery used to secure a massive commercial loan, combined with international capital flight and active tax evasion, is a Class 2 federal felony." Evelyn let out a piercing, breathless gasp. She looked around the pristine airport lobby, realizing there was absolutely no one left to manipulate. Her tailored cashmere sweater suddenly looked absurd, a luxury costume she had attempted to buy with my stolen identity. "We demand to call our domestic corporate attorney immediately," Arthur snapped, his chest heaving, slick with cold sweat, attempting one final, desperate assertion of dominance. "You do not possess the legal right to demand anything on foreign soil without valid travel documents," Carter corrected him smoothly, gesturing cleanly for the 2 armed Cayman officers to step forward. "You will be detained in a local holding facility until the United States Department of Justice officially finalizes your extradition paperwork. You will have plenty of time to call your counsel from federal lockup." The terminal fell dead silent as the cold, heavy steel handcuffs clicked sharply around Arthur and Evelyn's wrists. They did not fight. Their knees simply buckled under the crushing weight of the international jurisdiction. Evelyn wept loudly, her perfect mask completely destroyed in front of the wealthy tourists she'd so desperately tried to emulate. 2,000 miles away, and I was sitting perfectly still in the stark, fluorescent-lit interview room of the Financial Crimes Task Force headquarters. Special Agent Russo walked back into the room, holding a single sheet of heavy federal stock. "The Cayman authorities have formally detained Arthur and Evelyn Sterling at the Owen Roberts terminal," Russo confirmed, sliding the document across the metal table. "The $400,000 offshore holding account is entirely seized by the Department of the Treasury. Vanguard National Bank has officially dissolved the commercial liquidity loan from your Social Security number." I nodded once, placing the federal clearance document safely into my rigid plastic folder. I did not express an emotional rush of triumphant joy. I just felt the quiet, steady relief of a closed system functioning exactly as designed. Oh, the bank's legal team is now aggressively pursuing your parents for the underwriting fraud, and the IRS is preparing a massive tax evasion indictment, Russo added. You owe absolutely nothing, Nora. Your personal credit profile is flawlessly clean and securely locked under a maximum security biometric protocol. I stood up, walked out of the federal building, and stepped into the bright afternoon sun. 3 weeks later, the paper trail finalized their absolute ruin. The federal extradition process from the Cayman Islands was swift and utterly humiliating. Arthur and Evelyn were flown back to Miami in federal custody, entirely stripped of their luxury luggage and their arrogant entitlement. Arthur's commercial real estate firm was hit with a massive multi-agency compliance audit by the IRS, and his state operating license was indefinitely suspended pending a criminal trial. He and Evelyn were formally indicted on multiple felony counts of wire fraud, synthetic identity theft, international tax evasion, and conspiracy. The aggressive legal retainer, required to keep them out of pretrial federal detention, completely drained their remaining domestic savings, forcing them to liquidate their primary suburban estate at a massive loss. The IRS officially seized the entire $400,000 principal, sitting frozen in the Cayman holding account, directly applying it to the massive federal fines levied against my parents for violating the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. I filed a permanent ironclad restraining order against my parents, and a federal judge granted it without hesitation after reading the official Treasury report and the digital metadata file from Vanguard National. They thought they could use my flawless credit score to fund an illegal overseas retirement and leave me holding the massive debt. But the global banking system only responds to irrefutable proof, and my proof was bulletproof. If your own parents forged your signature to take out a $500,000 loan and fled the country, leaving you with an active IRS tax evasion notice, would you have pressed federal charges, or would you have quietly paid the debt to keep the family peace? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of absolute paper trail justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.